is up, everybody? Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy to be rolling along another week of college football. Week 4 upon us this week, and we start to dig into conference play as basically every league is getting rolling with their conference games now. Still a handful of non-conference games across college football, but you will see that most of the games, with the exception of maybe just a couple of the later ones, are conference games today. Some fun matchups as well. For all the talk of the ugliness of the TV slate last week, we've got some good ones to look forward to today and a good DFS slate to look forward to as well. So I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84. Have John Laub alongside me as always. John, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I think we have 6 top 25 matchups to look forward to today. And of course, we'll talk about the big one, Colorado at Oregon. That's pretty exciting. Notre Dame, Ohio State this evening. And I love 14 games on this big main slate. And we don't have an FCS team on the slate. So we know the rosters. With enough sample, we have 3 games. We kind of know rotations and starters and what teams are trying to do. So it's pretty exciting today.
Yeah, refreshing to have all that information for sure and not have to play the guessing game. We've got more robust, rotations figured out and stuff, as you mentioned there. So should be a fun one today. As usual, it seems like DraftKings is sticking with the 14 game, whatever they got to do to get 14 games on their main slate. That's kind of where they like to make that land. So 14 games this afternoon. Highlight game, of course, of the afternoon slate, Colorado and Oregon. We'll talk plenty about that one during the show today. Colorado coming off a late night win over their rivals, Colorado State, and we got some injuries with Travis Hunter being out for the Buffaloes today. And a game there that's got a huge total. So certainly a game that we'll be interested in from a DFS standpoint. John is up in the Northeast, so if you are up there in the path of the tropical storm, make sure you're staying safe. Doesn't sound like it's going to be anything, overly brutal for in terms of, damage and stuff like that. But lots of rain, lots of wind in the Northeast. The main game on the slate that's impacted by that is Miami and Temple. I know John said he's going to brave the elements to check out UConn this afternoon. So it takes a dedicated fan, John, to go watch UConn in the wind and the rain for sure. So kudos.
It's funny because I have 3 guys who go up with me, and one of them dropped out. But the other 2 we're going to venture out into the rain. I'm looking forward to seeing Riley Leonard. That's one of the reasons I like to get eyeballs on prospects. So I get to see Riley Leonard live today.
Yeah, so that game, of course, not on the main DFS slate, but a lot of those games up in the Northeast might have weather concerns. The baseball slate looks a bit messy today as well. So make sure you check out our content and Kevin Ross weather page for both college football and for baseball, whatever you happen to be playing today. It's a busy day with Mother Nature, but let's dig into this DFS slate here and start at quarterback like we usually do. Doesn't feel like we have a whole lot in terms of injury news that affects this slate. Ches Malusi went down for Wisconsin last night. What looks like it might be a season-ending injury, but of course they played yesterday, so we'll have to wait at least a week before they're back on the main slate. But I mean, is there anything that you are keeping an eye on from an injury perspective on this main slate? Sounds like Cam Rising is going to not start again today for Utah. But not a whole lot else in terms of impactful injuries. Hunter, obviously, we know is out, but anything else you're keeping an eye on from an injury perspective today?
No, I think we're pretty lucky with this slate, right? I mean, you did mention Rising, but we were talking about Nate Johnson last week, the Utah quarterback, and he came through. He wasn't, spectacular, but for the salary savings, he was big. Not sure if I really like him in today's slate. I kind of thinking, Justin, the question today is, do you pay up for 2 star quarterbacks? Because there's a lot of options on this slate. And are you going to go above 8,000 on the 2 starters at quarterback? I think that's a big decision. That's even, to me, there's not a lot of value at the bottom. So where are you going to find value, and how are you going to compose your quarterback lineup today?
Yeah, it's not the slate. We don't have as much slam dunk value as we have had in other weeks. So the jam in the studs is a little more difficult than it has been in a lot of the slates so far this year. But certainly, you probably want to spend up for one quarterback today. Of course, Bo Nix leading the way. We haven't really even seen the rushing potential from him this year. They've had a couple of cupcake wins. They did struggle a bit against Texas Tech, but for all the publicity that Colorado has gotten, we know that they struggle defensively. They play fast. This game has a total of like 72 points. So Bo Nix going to be tough to ignore this afternoon. Of course, you've got Sanders on the other side of that matchup, but he's been priced all the way up above 9K. You've got Jordan Travis, Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, and Baby Tua. All these guys up above 9,000. So it's pretty difficult, to play two of these top end guys. But how are you handling the top end of QB today?
I love this question, and I've thought a lot about it over the last 24 hours. I think everyone's got to make the decision if they want Nix or Sanders. I do think you have to take one of those two quarterbacks in this expected shootout. I think that's imperative. That's just how I've been roster building this morning. I tried, Justin, to get both of them in a lineup, and I think you're just taking way too much risk at the other positions because the salary is so high. Now, I think the GPP pivot, my friend, is Dylan Gabriel. Dylan Gabriel is less than 10% projection on ownership. And if you really want a guy to go contrarian there, he has tremendous. He's gotten 38, 25, and 30 points. Cincinnati isn't the same defense as they've been. And I'm going to talk about that defense a little bit later when we get to wide receivers. But Dylan Gabriel should throw a minimum of 3 touchdowns. He can't throw 5 because I don't like that Sooners running game. They rotate backs in Oklahoma this year, so I don't like any of them. And Dylan Gabriel is the guy to me who you really want to pivot. I'm fascinated by him because he could really break a GPP if you connect with the right wide receivers.
I think that's an interesting approach today, especially when you look at the ownership. He's coming in at about a quarter of the ownership of Nix. And, he is, if we just sort by raw points here, one of the top, I got to select just quarterback, one of the top, 3 or 4 gross projected scorers at the quarterback position today. So like Gabriel in GPPs as well. Probably, Nick, Sanders, you can certainly play in some stacks if you're stacking up that game, but Nix and Gabriel are the clear targets in this top range until you move down, the McCarthy, Van Dyke and the weather. It's just no need to go there until we get down to the lower part of the 8Ks. Tyler Shuck is going to project well in here. One of the more popular quarterbacks of the day. Chandler Morris, certainly going to get some buzz as well in what could be a high scoring game against SMU. We've got Daniels in here and Milroe, interesting, coming back from whatever mess Alabama tried to pull at quarterback last week that didn't work. What are your thoughts on kind of this 8K range of quarterbacks?
I do like to have one of these 8K range quarterbacks in my super flex today. The most interesting is Chandler Morris, but he's at a very high ownership. We have him projected at 32%. So I don't like him in GPP, but I do like him in cash. To me, if you're going to go GPP, I think you're looking at someone like Jalen Milroe. We have it less than 6% ownership. And I know he got benched last week, and I'm not going, there's different rumors on why he didn't play. And I'm not, there's so many different, I don't really know why, but what we do know is both of the other 2 quarterbacks Alabama did, Buckner and Simpson, did not play. Milroe is back under center. We've seen his ceiling. He's an uber dual threat quarterback. He could get over 100 yards rushing today. And why I like it even more, because it's going under the radar. Mississippi's going to push Alabama. Mississippi's got a good offense. I think this is a very sneaky shootout potential that isn't being talked about. And I think with less than around 6% ownership on Milroe, and you could even do Dart and Milroe if you really want to get different in a GPP. But I think Milroe with that low ownership is very interesting, my friend.
Yeah, I certainly think they'll let him take the ball today and not try any shenanigans at quarterback. And I mean, Chuck is the other guy that's just going to get some ownership. He's been running a little bit more. Not the greatest of matchups at West Virginia, but pretty safe floor for him as well. The guy that's gotten more steam as the week has gone along that I really like is Preston Stone. Obviously, he's probably not Tanner Mordecai in that offense, but you look at the two competitive games that they've had, he's thrown 37 and 45 passes. We saw TCU, show a lot of defensive vulnerability against Colorado in that opener. Stone is pretty cheap. The ownership has come up throughout the week, but I like Stone a good bit as well. But you've got other pivots in here. Jack Plummer, I think, is going to get some buzz. Maybe you look at Emory Jones if you think that Cincinnati can keep up with Oklahoma, though their offense hasn't really looked like it has clicked so far. If you want to go even cheaper, Castellanos for Boston College, I think at his price is a guy that deserves at least something of a peak today. But what are your thoughts as we get down more towards the value quarterback options?
There's two players I like, and you mentioned both of them. I do like Castellanos of Boston College going into Louisville. And I think Kentucky and Louisville is outside of the bad weather. So they're not at Boston College. So it shouldn't be a problem from what I know in the Kentucky area for Castellanos. Incredible running threat. He almost upset Florida State. So if you are looking to save money, I love that. And on a GPP, if you're going to go Dylan Gabriel because you want to differentiate, I think you've got to smash Emory Jones. I think, he's a dual threat quarterback at Cincinnati. We've seen some incredible upside with Jones right now. We saw 50 points in the opening week. Now, that's against Eastern Kentucky, so he's not going to do 50. But then we did see 29 points against Miami of Ohio. If Oklahoma is going to put a lot of points on this board, which I expect, that's going to force Emory Jones and the Bearcats to play catch up. So I think if you really want to be different, you're going to get very low ownership on Emory Jones and Dylan Gabriel. So I like that as a transition in a GPP, contrarian play, I should say.
Yeah, I like that too. Kind of warmed up to that as we get towards the weekend. I mean, you just got to look for, guys with maybe a little dual threat ability down here. As we saw last week with Nate Johnson, just doesn't take much to at least, reasonably pay off your price tag. So Castellanos at 5,900, I think is fine as well. We talked about Johnson a little bit in passing, but last week he was more viable because A, they were playing Weber State, and B, he was min salary. Now that he's up at 7,900, I just don't think there's any reason to go there today. Any other takes at quarterback? Klubnik for Clemson, maybe a guy that's got a reasonable projection. Cam Fancher for Marshall at 5,500. I don't have a whole lot of interest in those guys, but just trying to cover all the bases here if there's anybody that we miss. But anybody else you want to touch on at quarterback?
No, and I tried to jam Klubnik into my lineup a bunch of times, and I just can't. And the only other player, you might be interested in Jordan Travis, but they're in Clemson. So I just think there's a wide variety of outcomes with Travis playing the Tigers this week. So I'm just not interested in the two quarterbacks in that Florida State Clemson game.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but not a priority play for me either. So I think we can go ahead and move on to running back at this point. Interesting slate here that, the high end of running back Judkins we saw was downgraded to doubtful last week, but then ended up playing. They're facing Alabama today. You've got the Michigan guys that really haven't gotten going yet this year. It's basically looks like the Bucky Irving show at the top end of running backs today. How are you handling this top group?
If you want to go high-end running back, I do like Bucky Irving also. And, I've thought about it, and it is possible to do Bucky Irving and Bo Nix in the same lineup. There's a little bit of risk, but Irvin is also a pass catcher, and he's so explosive, Justin. So I understand why people are going to put the two of them together. I do think the X factor a little bit is Blake Corum. You're looking at a potential 35-point outing coming up. You know, we've seen it all of last year. It has not happened. On the previous 3 shows this year, we've advised against Blake Corum because Michigan just doesn't put him in the full quarters. The thing I like about it here, this is the opening of the Big Ten conference schedule for Michigan. So I think this is the first time Corum might get his 20 to 25 touches in a game. He might get all the goal line work. And I have not been impressed with Donovan Edwards this year, Justin. He's been one of the major disappointments from a fantasy perspective, and he's not even being used in the passing game. So when you're getting Blake Corum with under 10% rostership, he could break the slate for you, because if he's getting the touches that we know are coming, he could be the huge difference maker. I don't love him in cash, but because I do think he might only get the 12 carries, or he'll only get 15 touches. But if this is the game where he can go for the 3 touchdowns, 120 yards, this is the game against Rutgers where he might get the opportunity.
Yeah, I think these 2 guys at the top are really interesting. I like Hemby and GPPs as well at sub 5% ownership. You know, Maryland has kind of worked in a couple other backs this year, which worries people probably to spend all the way up for Hemby. But you're looking at really low ownership. His projection right now is only about 4 points below Irving. And Michigan State is awful. I mean, the only stories coming out of Michigan State right now is, what they're going to do with their coach. And they're horrible. So Hemby, I think Hemby and Corum are really interesting tournament plays. Pivots away from Irving today if you don't want to eat the chalk, or if you're playing more of the passing game for Oregon. So
there's Justin, one other good point that helps you with the argument. Hemby kicks butt against poor defenses. If you look at his game logs in the last 2 years, when they're playing a bad defense, Hemby usually goes off. So that's even a better argument. I do like that pivot in GPP.
All right. And then when we get down to the mid-range, again, you're going to see a couple of really 2 plays that are popping off the page here. Jawar Jordan, who we talked about last week, just remains an efficiency machine with the touches that he gets. Boston College certainly has their issues on defense. Imani Bailey in a positive matchup and appears to clearly be the RB1 for TCU. And really, those are the only guys in the 6K range that, they kind of dwarf everybody else in terms of projection. Do you have a preference on Jordan versus Bailey here?
If I don't play Chad Morris, I'm going Imani Bailey. I think Bailey is now the guy. He's the more impressive. Earlier in the year, they were playing a lot of Trey Sanders, especially near the goal line. But as I've looked at the box scores, the snaps, watching the Horned Frogs play, Imani Bailey appears to be the now clear starter. And that is a very projected shootout game with SMU. I don't like Bailey and Morris together, but if you're going to bypass Morris, I like Bailey. And I'm a Jordan guy, but the problem is, you're right, he's been so efficient. If we lose a little bit of that efficiency, the touches aren't there. So I'm going to bank on touches with Bailey. He seems more in line to get the majority of the touches for his team right now.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment for sure. I think that's the safer play. If the ownership was a lot lower, I'd say you could go with Jordan in GPPs, but really it projected around the same ownership. So, I mean, is there anybody else in this area that you like? I mentioned Michigan State being horrible, and Nate Carter does appear to be their clear starting running back. But, I mean, last week, 17 carries for 48 yards, the first time they really faced any real competition. He had 19 for 111 and 3 scores the week before, but that was against Richmond. Any interest in Nate Carter, Jaquindon Jackson, anybody else above 6K here?
The only one I would be interested in would be Jackson of Utah. We have seen his ceiling. He's been a little disappointing this year. So I understand why the ownership is projected so low. But UCLA is going to put points on the board. And what we do know is Utah's probably going to stay committed to the running game. Now, they do have Johnson at quarterback, who's a dual threat. But if the Bruins focus on stopping Johnson might have the opportunity here to really outperform his 6.1K. Now, I agree. I don't know what I'd have to do to play Nate Carter. And I've seen Nate Carter play, but you're so right. The Spartans are not good. There's no way I'm putting them into a lineup today. So I like Jackson, and at less than 1% ownership, you are going to differentiate from the field there.
Yeah, he's definitely a reasonable play in tournaments. Good pivot away from some of the chalk if you think that Michigan State can keep that game competitive. So, all right, checking through the Discord, don't see anything in terms of huge news at the moment. We've got another couple of popular plays here right around the $6,000 mark. That would be Ali, who has been popular both times. Marshall has been on a main slate this year. They did price him up a little bit this time compared to last time, but still at $6K for a workhorse back. He's projecting well. Devin Neal for Kansas is bizarrely cheap for some reason. He's 5,900 on DraftKings. He's like 11K on FanDuel. So, Neal is going to project really, really well here on DraftKings. And anybody else kind of in this range is going to be fairly low owned, like a Taj Brooks for a GPP pivot for Texas Tech, especially with the passing game for that team getting a little love today. So who do you like in kind of this range around 5,600, 6K?
Yeah, I'll talk about Ali and Neal later. So they're definitely kind of the chalky high ownership. But in GPP, if you don't like Brooks, because maybe you want some of the Texas Tech passing game, and I think Brooks is an interesting player here in GPP, but I've been looking at CJ Donaldson of West Virginia. He's only 5.9. Last year, he was a freshman, so he's a second-year player, sophomore year. But I think West Virginia can run the football. He's a big guy. He came in at a tight end, and he transitioned to the running back, and he should be able to gain yards against this Red Raider defense. And he's very low ownership with a decent ceiling. So I think if I really want to differentiate, I think CJ Donaldson, if you believe West Virginia can keep this game close and the Red Raiders aren't just going to blow them out. Now, if it was in Texas Tech, I'd be more concerned. But at home in West Virginia, I think they're going to stay committed to the running game. I think Donaldson is a very interesting pivot.
Yeah, I don't mind that call. Nice run back in terms of some stacks. He's affordable at 5,900. Potential to get 20 touches if things break his way. Both Brooks and Donaldson, I think, are certainly fine. I mentioned the chalky guys with Ali and Neal, and maybe throw Will Shipley in that mix as well at 5,700. I mean, Clemson's passing game is just a shell of what it was a few years ago. So maybe they commit more to Shipley as their games get more competitive this year. And then once we get by those guys, really not a whole lot until we get down to LJ Martin at 4,900. And he's probably the lowest I'm going to go today. I don't see anybody with even a reasonable projection above him. So the floor is yours with the rest of the potential running back options here.
I do agree with you, Justin. The lowest price running back that I want to look at is LJ Martin. And if the viewers don't know, he plays at BYU. And they had, Aiden Robbins. I think it's Aiden Robbins. He came in from Las Vegas. And I thought, and many other CFF players thought, that Robbins would have the backfield at BYU. But he's injured. And Martin came in last week against Arkansas. He had 23 carries for 77 yards. And I know one of the runs was a big touchdown run. So maybe the yards per carry are a little bit, kind of skewed in his advantage. But I look at the depth chart right now, and BYU doesn't have anyone else that I could see getting over 15 carries minimum. He had 23 last week against Arkansas. They stayed in the game, right? They ended up scoring over 30 points. Martin had 2 receptions in that game, and I like him against Kansas here. I think Kansas is a sneaky shootout. I do like Martin. Now, what was his projection? I didn't look. I don't have it up. What is Martin? We have him at 27% ownership, so he's not a GPP candidate. But for a cash game, if you need to save because you're really invested, in that game between Oregon and Colorado. I think Martin's a nice option there for you.
Yeah, my lineup HQ went haywire there for a second. So, all right, refreshing that. And so the interesting part is, as we kind of summarize running back here, because there are so many guys that look to be a little bit mispriced, I mean, you're just going to see the ownership concentrate on, 6 or 7 guys. That's who everybody's going to play. So anybody else beyond those top 6 or 7, I think is interesting for GPPs. We talked about Corum. We talked about Hemby. I think spending up to be a little bit different at running back makes some sense today. So any other thoughts at this position for you?
The only other player I might consider would be Trey Benson of Florida State. Very low ownership. There's question marks. I think people are down on him. He's been kind of inconsistent, but he did have a 3-touchdown game. I believe he had a 3-touchdown game 2 weeks ago. Yeah, against USM, Southern Mississippi. He had a 3-touchdown game with a high of 28.9 DraftKings points. Benson has potential to really be a difference maker with an extremely low rostership projected at Clemson this week.
All right. And certainly the projected, game of the year there in the ACC right off the bat. So it will be interesting to see where that game plays today. All right. The one thing I want to note here is as we move to wide receiver, we've got a few guys from Miami and Temple. They're all affordable, like George and Restrepo and Wright are projecting among the highest owned receivers today. I would expect that to dip with the weather forecast there being so ugly. So, I guess we'll start at the top here in a second, but have you come off of these Miami, particularly the Miami guys who were projecting as the highest owned receivers of the week? Have you tempered your expectations on the passing game here with the weather?
I have, my friend, and on Friday morning, I had 2 different Miami. I loved Restrepo, and I did like Colby Young very much. And I even was thinking about David Martin, the tight end at Temple. However, now that I live up in the Northeast and following the weather, I'm very worried that passing game, maybe Miami throws for 250 and 2 touchdowns. But, in order to put in 1 or 2 Hurricanes, I wanted 350 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. So I've drawn back from the Miami passing game. I pretty much have taken them out of my cash game lineups right now.
Yeah, I think that's the sensible approach at the moment. I mean, obviously there's other options that feel a little bit safer, in those salary ranges. So, all right, let's talk about the top end of wide receivers today. It sounds like Franklin is going to play for Ole Miss, but until we see him put up some numbers, I think avoiding that when he's the highest priced receiver on the board makes sense. So it starts with Colorado and Oregon. Franklin of Oregon is going to be one of the top overall receivers of the day. I mean, again, Oregon projected for like 47 points or something today. Then you've got the Colorado guys. Horn and Weaver should see extra targets with Hunter out today. And really, I think you got to get some exposure to the pass catchers in that game. So Horn, Weaver, Franklin at the top. Who's your favorite?
I think it's Franklin. He's my number 1 wide receiver. If you want to pivot without Justin Hunter, and you had mentioned it earlier, Travis Hunter, I'm sorry, the dual threat, the cornerback / wide receiver for Colorado, he's out. I'm looking at Horn right now. We have him projected at less than 10% rostership. Weaver at 14%. So I think that it's interesting that Horn, if you're looking at the 3 players and you're trying to differentiate, Horn might be your better option just based on the low rostership. And if you look back at the game logs, Horn opened up at TCU with a 31.7. Now he's fallen off a little bit, 14.3 and 19.6. But I think Oregon's going to focus on Weaver, and I still expect Weaver to do well. But I do like the pivot to Horn because he seems to be getting overlooked. And when I look around and I listen to podcasts, it does not seem like Horn is getting much love this week. So I think he's the most fascinating pivot in that game of the 3 big wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have exposure to all of them. Weaver is my favorite on the Colorado side, but he's also picked up a little bit more ownership as the week has gone along. I don't think there's enough of a difference in there to where, I think if you like one guy better, feel free to play him. It should be decent amount of targets for both Horn and Weaver today. And of course, I'm all about Oregon as well. So Franklin would be my favorite of the group. In any format, really. And then as we dip just down a little bit, we got Jamari Thrash coming off another big game last week. He's been priced up, so he's not quite as discounted as he was a week ago. You've got Evan Stewart. You've got Keon Coleman in here, similar to, we talked about at running back. Florida State not getting a lot of buzz offensively today. But Coleman, Stewart, maybe Johnny Wilson as well for Florida State. Thrash, any interest in these guys here as a step down from the big boys?
I love Thrash until he proves to us that he isn't just a star. I mean, Justin, Thrash has been playing so well. I think he's got over 25 points in every game this year. Let me just double check quickly. I'll look at his game log. Oh, 24.4 was his lowest. He's just been so good all year, making the transition from Georgia State up to Louisville at the Power 5. I love him this week. I like Evan Stewart. Now, we have him projected at 11% rostership, so in cash games, I think that's pretty nice. He didn't play last week. I don't hear a lot of discussion. They're playing Auburn. But, Texas A&M has been pretty good with Connor Wegman throwing the football. Evan Stewart could be a really big smash spot here for him. He's listed as probable, but from what looking around, I think he's going to play. And in the two games that he's played, he scored 34 and 28 DraftKings points. So I think Stewart's in a great spot that isn't being talked about a lot.
Yeah, I like that call as well. I think he's definitely an upside tournament play. All those guys, I think, at low ownership are certainly within the realm of keeping in your GPP pool, because I don't like a whole lot right below that range. Like, the Maryland guys, you can take your shot on who's going to get the targets there, but I'd rather just play Hemby against that Michigan State defense at running back. Isaiah Bond. I think these guys are okay, but nothing that's spectacular. Until we get to Bradley at 5,900, who, again, with the Miami guys maybe trending down with the weather, seems like Jerand Bradley is probably going to be the guy that picks up the most steam in this kind of 6K-ish price range here today.
Yeah, I'm big into Jerand Bradley. I think he should be the leader in the targets for Texas Tech. Now, they go with 4 receivers and they do spread the ball around a little bit. But Bradley has been the most consistent producer at the wide receiver position if you want to put in Tyler Shuck and Bradley. And I have no problem running Bradley out without Shuck at quarterback. Obviously, if you're going to stack Texas Tech, West Virginia, if you want to go real contrarian. But Bradley in a cash game, I love him at that. What do we got him at salary? 22%, rostership 22%. We have him projected at 16 points, but he could get over 20 rather easily if he gets into the end zone twice. So I love Bradley at that price salary.
Yeah, I think he's one of the safest plays on the board today, and a nice pivot. If you were on somebody like Restrepo and you're looking to come off of that because of the weather. All right, let's go down into the mid part of the 5Ks. Obviously, had a lot of names in here. Roman Wilson was the first one that stood out to me for Michigan, and just in terms of talent. I mean, obviously, we don't know how much they'll have to throw the ball, but he's there. Anthony for Oklahoma. Again, more guys that could be pivots away from Miami. Not to say that George and Restrepo don't project well, but I just don't think you're going to see as much passing in that game with the weather. So any other thoughts on some of these middle tier wide receivers today?
I do like Roman Wilson, but we had mentioned it. It's about efficiency, right? Roman Wilson, his biggest game was 6 receptions opening of the year against ECU, but he has scored every game this season. If you've watched Michigan, he's by far their best offensive player in the passing game. Now, I do expect they blew out Bowling Green. It wasn't much of a game last week. So I expect that Roman Wilson will have a bigger, more targets, probably more receptions. He's only 5,500. So I think that's a very nice pivot. And the guy, I actually have him in a lot of my lineups right now doing the research. I like Andrell Anthony. If you look, Cincinnati's terrible at the safety, Justin, and they give out lots of yards deep down the field. Andrell Anthony is the guy. He's a transfer from Michigan. He's getting more snaps, more targets, and Dylan Gabriel hits him deep. He's only 5,300. I love him in this game against Cincinnati. I think it's a very interesting GPP stack. If you go Gabriel, Anthony, and Emory Jones to really differentiate from the field, because I have a feeling Andrell Anthony's going to hit a deep home run. I don't think the Bearcats will be able to cover this deep passing game.
All right, looking for other options that we maybe want to touch on here at wide receiver. The other guys that are projecting pretty well on a points per dollar basis. I like Miles Price a good bit for Texas Tech. If you're looking to get away from Bradley, maybe as a GPP pivot. Jalen Robinson at 4K for TCU is getting some ownership love today. All the Boston College wide receivers. If you trust that, they're going to throw the ball, obviously Castellanos is a dual threat guy, maybe not as dangerous with the arm, but O'Keefe is 4,600. Lewis Bond is under 4K. Again, if you're looking for pivots on the value end today, maybe Bo Collins for Clemson if you want to trust one of their receivers. There's not a lot of safety here with the remaining options. But you can certainly, if you capture, one or two of these guys are going to have a big day, just a matter of figuring out the right one. So any other values that you like here?
There's actually two players now. Remember, on DraftKings, tight ends qualify at wide receiver. I am very interested in that SMU game. Their tight end / wide receiver, he's technically listed at tight end, but RJ Maryland. Last week, he didn't catch a pass, but he should be back this week. He has some potential, and I think TCU is going to force SMU to play catch-up in the second half. You mentioned earlier that you like Preston Stone. I don't really love any of these SMU wide receivers, so I'm looking to save salary. And if I'm looking for a guy who's very different, it would be RJ Maryland of SMU. He's only 3.4. I like him very much. And we mentioned Maryland. Corey Dyches, he's their tight end, and he's another one of those tweener guys. If you're looking for someone, if Hembry has a good game, not incredible game, Dyches has moments where he's very impressive, and he could reach the end. I think he's 4K. If when I was looking at it before, why can't I find him all of a sudden? I think he's around the 4K range.
Yeah, he is 4,700.
4,700. So he's someone who I think might be interested if you're looking for a little bit of a pivot and you're interested in that Maryland passing game.
All right, taking one last stab through news here. I think we are good. And we will talk about the FanDuel slate here in just a second. But before we do that, some of you might just be joining us. You might wonder, well, who'd you guys talk about at running back? Who'd you guys talk about quarterback? Who's the guy I have to have today at this part of the show? We always like to bring you John's Fantastic Four, guys that you can absolutely build around with your lineups today on DraftKings. So, John, who do you have for your Fantastic Four today?
So if you want to play and you want to use our optimizer, I'm going to give you 4 great start players who I like a ton, and you could put in the lineup. I'm going to let our viewers decide between Bo Nix and Shedeur Sanders. So neither player is going to be in the Fantastic Four, because I want, you guys know we like Nix. We've talked about him today. In the super flex position, I'm going Chad Morris of TCU. He is the offense. We talked about Imani Bailey, and I like him, but Chad Morris is a dual threat quarterback. I believe he's averaging over 27 DraftKings points a game. He's a little salary savings at 7,800, so plug him into your super flex. I love him. We were talking about the running back position. Neither of these two players are GPP. Their ownership is too high. But for cash games, they are locked into all my lineups. Rasheen Ali, in the 2 games, he scored 34 and 29.9 DraftKings points. He is the Marshall offense, the goal line back, the pass catching back, the 3-down back. Love Rasheen Ali. And I just don't know how Devin Neal is under 6K. He's scored over 27 points in all 3 games. He's unbelievable. He's a home run hitter. He had 17 carries, which was his season high last week against Nevada. So I love Devin Neal. And the final lock this week, Troy Franklin. He has become the guy for the Ducks. If you've watched Oregon as much as I have this year, because I've been scouting them for Bo Nix, when the game is close, he has had 7 and 6 receptions. Last week against Hawaii, they blow him out. So he left the game, I think, early in the 3rd quarter. He has scored 32 and 25 points. I do not see how Colorado can cover him. The Buffaloes are very bad in the secondary. I think Franklin goes off. So lock in Chad Morris, Rasheen Ali, Devin Neal, and Troy Franklin. Use our optimizer. Those are my fantastic 4 this week.
All right, love it. Some strong plays there. And again, you get a lot of good point per dollar projections here with some of those guys for sure. So, all right, let's go ahead and pivot over to FanDuel. Again, as I like to do, I will highlight the day games are fairly similar to what DraftKings has, but we've got the night games that are also available on FanDuel. Highlighted by Arkansas LSU should be a fun one tonight. And then, of course, the big matchup on the slate this evening is Ohio State against Notre Dame. So, John, I guess I'll give you the floor first here and just talk about who are some guys that are popping on FanDuel, maybe that we haven't talked about throughout the show here today.
I'm going to go with Jaden Daniels. Man, was he good last week I did my the night slate on DraftKings, and he went totally off. When Jaden Daniels has a good matchup, other than that Florida State game, and the Seminoles just beat LSU. But if you look over the last 2 years, Daniels has really only had 1 or 2 stinkers since he's taken over that job. They're playing Arkansas. Very disappointed in Arkansas. They're not playing very good. I think the Tigers are going to be able to put up a lot of points on them. And the other interesting quarterback we have not talked about, but Cameron Ward, I don't think has he been on a DraftKings slate? I don't think you and so. I have. Yeah, so he's on this slate. Cameron Ward,
I think they were on against Wisconsin.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, but it was Wisconsin. We didn't think they'd score, and then they did.
That's why. But I like them against Oregon State. Now, there is a challenge that maybe the Beavers just run the clock. So I don't expect them to have as many plays as they normally do because Oregon likes to get a little physical at the line of scrimmage. But Cameron Ward has been really good this year. He's an interesting play. We have him at less than 6% rostership. So I think Cameron Ward is a very interesting pivot on this slate. 2 players we haven't talked about much this year.
Yeah, I like that. I think that game is really interesting from a FanDuel perspective, and of course, the night slate on DraftKings as well. A game that could feature some points with a couple teams that tend to fly under the radar a little bit. Obviously, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, who was fantastic last week, was basically a slate breaker. Are going to get more of the publicity, but Ward, Victor, who tends to get a ton of targets there. Even Quinn Ewers, I think, is somewhat interesting on FanDuel as well. Let's talk about running backs in some of these FanDuel games because, this is the spot where there's not a whole lot at the top on DraftKings. We've talked about, Corum and Hemby being GPP guys, but nothing that feels super, great to spend up for. So we do have Estime here against Ohio State and Henderson on the other side of that game. These 2 guys should finally be the workhorse backs in what should be a close game. We've got Jonathan Brooks. We've got Damian Martinez. DJ Giddens is projecting really well. So lots of options here on this FanDuel slate. Who do you like at running back in some of these games?
It's amazing, Justin. You had said it before. Look at the difference in pricing. Devin Neal's
he's 11K.
It's unbelievable. It's like, what are they looking at? I'll take it for now, but what are they looking at DraftKings? Because Devin Neal's at the top of the board. Now, interesting enough, Justin, I don't think I'm going to play Devin Neal in FanDuel. I think he's at the top of the board at 11K. I think that's too pricey for me. And the same thing with Bucky Irvin. So we'd see a massive difference in salary. The running backs that I like most on this slate, I like Jonathan Brooks of Texas. Last week, he was the one who got the majority of the touches. It looks like he has kind of distinguished himself from the rest of the roster in the backfield. So I like Jonathan Brooks. He's only 8.6, so you come down a lot on this slate. And then Damian Martinez. I'm very interested in that Oregon State-Washington State game. Damian Martinez at 8.4. Now, we have not gotten lucky. DJU is taking some of those goal line carries. However, I do expect a 2 or 3 touchdown game is coming from Damian Martinez. And if I'm going to bet on a heavy workload, because I do think the game plan for the Beavers should be to try to get 35 minutes of that clock, I think Damian Martinez is very fast. I love him and Brooks on this at those salaries on this slate.
Yeah, a little bit of difference on FanDuel with how to treat the running backs because of those salary differences that between FanDuel and DraftKings, and then of course the additional games as well. All right, I'm going to bring up the YouTube here. I think it looks like we've got the questions mainly covered on Discord. Do have a note from Andy Smith. Texas A&M receiver Noah Thomas is out today. Evan Stewart is warming up. So sounds like that is the only real news that's come across during the show here. I'm going to peek into YouTube as well. We didn't talk about Will Shipley a whole lot on DraftKings. I mean, do you have any interest in Will Shipley today? What are you doing with Clemson in general?
In general, on DFS, I'm staying away. I do have Shipley in some season-long leagues, but I'm just looking down at the pricing here, 8.2. I'm not in love with. I would have liked to get him under 8 because I do think there's risk, and they play Phil Maffa, and then we're just not even really sure how the Clemson offense is going to hold up. Florida State's got a pretty good front seven, and I don't know if that Clemson offensive line is going to be able to block up front, and that's a concern. Now, if I knew Shipley was going to get the 20 touches, but there's just no guarantee, I'll tell you a nice pivot if you're looking. Well, we have him at high rostership. Maybe I was just thinking, but DJ Giddens, the running back at Kansas State, we haven't talked about him. I like him a lot against UCF. And I looked earlier this morning, Will Howard, the quarterback for Kansas State, is extraordinarily questionable. Doesn't look like he's going to play. So DJ Giddens might be in line here to get more touches than we're accustomed to. And I do like the matchup against UCF. UCF doesn't have their starting quarterback, JPP, John Reese Plumlee. So they're going with McCain, which I'm not, I think we need to see more McCain until I make a decision on him. He does have some interest and upside, but I think Giddens in this running game for Kansas State, I think that's a very nice play today.
All right, we'll go ahead and get out of here. Before we do, any thoughts on the wide receivers on FanDuel? The guys that we have there, obviously Victor for Washington State. I just talked about Neighbors, and we've got Thomas for LSU as well. Xavier Worthy on the FanDuel slate. Anybody you want to highlight at receiver on FanDuel before we get out of here?
It's Lincoln Victor. I also put him in on our expert picks for DraftKings night slate. I'm looking at Lincoln Victor at less than 10% rostership. He plays out of the slot, Justin, for Washington State, and he's just peppered with targets. It's absolutely insane. I love Lincoln Victor. And now with that news with Noah Thomas and Evan Stewart warming up, I think he's even more. If you want to get off of Malik Neighbors and the Ohio State wide receivers, I think Evan Stewart at low rostership is a great play this week, but I expect him to go up now. We have him projected at 2%. but I love Stewart now with Noah Thomas out of the game.
All right. Love that call as well. Certainly the UCF guys, we're some uncertainty there at quarterback. Their receivers are cheap on FanDuel. If you want to take a shot on one, Hudson or Baker, I think they're fine, but know that there is a pretty low floor there as well. Of course, if you got the salary, you can always get up to Marvin Harrison. Should be a 4-quarter competitive game there tonight with Ohio State and Notre Dame. So with that, we got to run here and finish up our lineups and get rolling with our weekend. So thanks as always for watching. Leave a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel. And again, free RotoGrinders Discord, rotogrinders.com/Discord, college football channel there. We'll keep you up to date if any additional news breaks throughout the day. So thanks to John, as always, for joining me. Thanks to Rob for producing behind the scenes for us today. I am Justin, and we'll talk to you next week, everybody. Take care.